London, 1857. The ballroom of Harrington House glittered with chandeliers, the light dancing across jewels and silken gowns as society's elite twirled across the polished floor. In the corner, partially hidden by a velvet curtain, stood Lord Lawrence Xavier, the Duke of Thornfield, a man whose very presence caused whispers to ripple through the assembly like wind through summer wheat. "He's here again," Lady Pembroke hissed behind her fan to her companion. "Fourth ball this season, yet he refuses to dance. Simply watches, like some predator." The Duke's reputation preceded him everywhere: cold, ruthless, widowed under circumstances that had set London gossip aflame 5 years prior. Some said he had driven his young wife to her death with his cruel indifference. Others whispered of darker things. Whatever the truth, Lawrence Xavier had transformed from the most eligible bachelor in England to its most feared aristocrat. "They say he has come to select his next victim," continued Lady Pembroke with relish. Though heaven knows what lady would accept his hand now. Lawrence heard every word, as he was meant to. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his expression remained carved from marble as he surveyed the room with ice-blue eyes. These gatherings were merely obligations to him, tedious necessities to maintain his position in society while he managed his vast estates and business ventures. "Your Grace," Lord Harrington approached, bowing slightly. "Might I persuade you to join the dancing? Lady Crawford's niece has just arrived from Hampshire and I believe I've endured enough spectacle for one evening." Lawrence cut him off, his voice deep and controlled. "You'll excuse me." Without awaiting a response, he turned on his heel and strode toward the exit, ignoring the parting of the crowd before him like the Red Sea. Just as he reached the grand doorway, a commotion erupted at the servants' entrance across the ballroom. "You cannot enter this way," came a butler's strained voice. "Please, I must speak with Lady Harrington immediately," insisted a female voice, soft yet determined. Something in that voice, its quiet dignity despite obvious distress, made Lawrence pause. He watched as a young woman in a simple grey dress, clearly not a guest, tried to speak to the increasingly agitated butler. "I am employed as a seamstress for Lady Harrington's daughter," the woman explained. "There's been a terrible mistake with Miss Harrington's wedding gown, and then return tomorrow at a proper hour." This is outrageous. Lawrence found himself moving toward the disturbance before he had consciously decided to intervene. The seamstress turned, and for a moment, their eyes met across the room. Hers were a warm amber that widened slightly upon recognizing him. "Is there a problem?" Lawrence asked, his tone making it clear that he expected an immediate answer. The butler stammered, "Your Grace, this person has attempted to disturb the ball. I was just removing her." The young woman straightened her spine, though the top of her head would barely reach Lawrence's shoulder. "I apologize for the intrusion, Your Grace. I'm Jane Mercer, seamstress for Miss Harrington's trousseau. There's been a misunderstanding with the wedding gown that requires immediate attention, but I'll return tomorrow as suggested." Something about her composure intrigued him. Most of the serving class cowered in his presence, most of the upper class simpered or sneered. This woman did neither. "Nonsense," Lawrence found himself saying. "Harrington's daughter weds in 3 days. I presume this matter is urgent." "Yes, Your Grace." A flicker of relief crossed her features. "Then I shall escort you to Lady Harrington myself." The ballroom fell silent as the Duke of Thornfield, who had not offered his arm to a woman in 5 years, led the plainly dressed seamstress across the polished floor toward their hostess. Jane Mercer had never intended to draw attention to herself, especially not from the infamous Duke of Thornfield. All she had wanted was to quietly inform Lady Harrington that her daughter's wedding gown had been damaged when a pipe burst in the workroom, and that she would need to work through the night to repair it. Now, as she walked beside the tall, forbidding Duke, she felt every eye in the room upon them. His reputation was well known even among the working classes, widowed under mysterious circumstances, ruthless in business, and possessed of a temper that had once reportedly caused a man to flee England rather than face his wrath. Yet his hand at her elbow was steady, his manner polite if distant. "Thank you, Your Grace," she murmured. "I hope I haven't caused you inconvenience." "You've provided me with an excellent excuse to depart early," he replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "For that, I should thank you." Jane risked a glance at his profile: strong jaw, straight nose, a mouth that looked as if it had forgotten how to smile. Handsome, undeniably, but with a hardness that suggested years of guarding against pain. Lady Harrington's face registered shock when she saw them approaching. "Your Grace!" What is, Lady Harrington? Miss Mercer here has something urgent to discuss regarding your daughter's wedding preparations," Lawrence stated flatly. Jane quickly explained the situation with the gown. Lady Harrington's initial annoyance at the interruption quickly transformed to panic and then gratitude when Jane assured her that repairs could be completed in time if she could begin immediately. Of course, Lady Harrington fretted. "Take whatever supplies you need. You may use the small sewing room adjoining Caroline's chambers." "I'll see that Miss Mercer finds her way," the Duke announced, surprising everyone present, including himself. As they left the ballroom, Jane couldn't help but ask, "Why are you helping me, Your Grace?" Lawrence paused at the foot of the grand staircase. "Perhaps I recognize the value of someone who takes pride in their work," he said after a moment. "A rare quality, in my experience." The simple statement, delivered without flattery or condescension, warmed Jane unexpectedly. "Thank you. Though I suspect you've now fueled enough gossip to last the ton until Christmas." A ghost of what might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Let them talk. I stopped caring for society's opinion long ago." "Yet you attend their balls," Jane observed, then immediately wished she could recall the impertinent words. Instead of taking offense, Lawrence regarded her with newfound interest. "Shrewd observation, Miss Mercer. Perhaps another time, I'll explain that particular contradiction." When they reached the sewing room, he paused at the door. "Will you require anything else?" "No, thank you. I have everything I need to begin." Jane hesitated, then added, "Good night, Your Grace." "Good night, Miss Mercer." He inclined his head slightly. "I trust our paths will cross again." As he walked away, Jane couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just transpired, though what it might mean, she could not begin to guess. 3 days later, Jane stood in the shadows of St. George's Church, watching with quiet pride as Caroline Harrington walked down the aisle in the gown Jane had spent 2 sleepless nights repairing. Not a single guest could detect where the water damage had been, and the bride herself had wept with joy at the restoration. As the ceremony concluded and the wedding party prepared to depart for the breakfast, Jane slipped toward a side exit. Her work was done, and she had other commissions awaiting her attention. "Miss Mercer." The deep voice halted her retreat. She turned to find the Duke of Thornfield standing nearby, impeccably dressed in formal attire. "Your Grace," she curtsied. "I didn't expect to see you here." Harrington is a business associate, he explained, though it felt somehow like an excuse. "The gown is exquisite." "Your work?" "The design and execution, yes," Jane acknowledged. "Though I can take credit only for the emergency repairs these past few days." Lawrence studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of long hours and dedicated effort. "You've had little sleep." "A small sacrifice." Miss Harrington, Lady Westbury now, deserved her perfect day. "Your commitment is admirable." He hesitated, then asked, "Have you other pressing commitments today?" Jane blinked in surprise. "I was planning to return to my workroom to begin a commission for Lady Ashford." "Might I persuade you to delay that work for a few hours? I find myself in need of professional consultation." Her brow furrowed. "Consultation?" "My ward, Lady Sophia, arrives from school next week for the season. I'm told her wardrobe requires enhancement." He spoke the word as if it were a foreign language. "I know nothing of such matters and would value your expertise." Jane couldn't quite conceal her astonishment. The Duke of Thornfield was asking a working-class seamstress for fashion advice? "I would compensate you for your time, of course," he added, misinterpreting her hesitation. "It's not that, Your Grace. I'm merely surprised you would seek my opinion when there are modistes in London far more familiar with the current fashions for young ladies of quality. I've observed your work. You have taste, skill, and discretion," 3 qualities I value above fashionable connections. His gaze held hers steadily. Will you come? The invitation felt significant in ways Jane couldn't articulate. Yes, she found herself saying. I would be happy to assist. An hour later, Jane found herself in the Duke's imposing Mayfair residence, being led through cavernous halls by a butler who seemed perpetually startled by her presence. The house was grand but somber, with heavy draperies and dark furnishings that suggested no woman's touch had softened its masculine severity in years. She was shown to a drawing room where several trunks had been arranged. The Duke entered moments later. These contain Lady Sophia's current garments, he explained. She's 17 and has spent the last 3 years at a finishing school in Bath. This will be her first season. Jane moved toward the trunks. May I? At his nod, she began examining the contents, laying garments across a chaise longue with practiced hands. These are well made but quite plain for a young lady's debut season, she observed. Too severe in style and rather institutional in appearance. You're being diplomatic, Miss Mercer. They're drab and outdated, aren't they? Jane's lips curved upward. Perhaps somewhat. What would you recommend? She considered carefully. Lady Sophia will need morning dresses, walking ensembles, afternoon gowns, and at least 6 to 8 ball gowns for her first season. Lighter colors would suit a young debutante, pale blues, soft pinks, lavender. The current silhouette favors a fuller skirt than these provide, with more elaborate trimmings. As she spoke, she noticed the Duke watching her with that same intense focus he had shown at the ball, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. Could you provide sketches of what you envision? He asked. Something I might show Sophia upon her arrival. Of course, Jane agreed. Though it would be preferable to meet Lady Sophia before finalizing any designs. Each young lady has her own preferences and personality that should be reflected in her wardrobe. Sensible advice. Lawrence nodded. Perhaps you might return next week when she arrives? I confess I'm ill-equipped to guide a young woman through her first season. My sister-in-law normally assists, but she's in Italy until June. The request surprised Jane. I would be happy to provide guidance, Your Grace, but... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Society might find it unusual for Lady Sophia to take fashion advice from a seamstress rather than from ladies of her own circle. Society's opinions concern me only insofar as they affect Sophia's prospects, he stated flatly. You speak with intelligence and show good judgment. That's worth more than a fashionable name. The compliment, delivered without flattery, warmed her unexpectedly. Then I shall do my best to help Lady Sophia make a favorable impression. As Jane gathered her things to leave, Lawrence asked, You maintain your own business, Miss Mercer? Not employed by one of the Bond Street establishments. I have a small workshop on Regent Street, she explained. I was apprenticed to Madame Delacroix for 5 years before establishing my own business 2 years ago. That requires considerable courage, he observed. To venture independently. Necessity more than courage, Your Grace. When my father died, I needed to support myself and my younger brother through his medical studies. Something shifted in Lawrence's expression. You've shouldered significant responsibility at a young age. As I imagine you did when you inherited your title, she replied, then immediately worried she had overstepped. But the Duke merely inclined his head in acknowledgement. Indeed, Miss Mercer. Perhaps we understand each other better than might be expected. As the butler showed her out, Jane pondered the Duke's words. Understanding between a Duke and a seamstress seemed improbable at best, and potentially dangerous at worst. Yet she couldn't deny the strange connection she felt to this man whose reputation had made him London's most feared aristocrat. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Jane completed Lady Ashford's commission and prepared sketches for Lady Sophia's potential wardrobe. When she returned to Thornfield House, she found the atmosphere transformed by the presence of a lively young woman with chestnut curls and her guardian's same piercing blue eyes. Miss Mercer! Lady Sophia exclaimed when Jane was announced. Uncle Lawrence has told me how you're to rescue me from fashion disaster. I'm ever so grateful. Jane smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. "I'm happy to assist, Lady Sophia, though I'm sure your wardrobe isn't quite the catastrophe you imagine." "Oh, but it is," Sophia insisted. "Just dreadful schoolgirl frocks and not a single gown that wouldn't make me look like a governess. No offense to governesses, of course." From his position by the window, Lawrence watched their interaction with guarded interest. "Sophia, perhaps you might show Miss Mercer the colors and styles you prefer." For the next hour, Jane guided the excited girl through fashion plates and fabric samples, taking notes on her preferences and making suggestions. Lady Sophia proved to have excellent taste, if somewhat extravagant aspirations. Pearl embroidery on all 8 ball gowns might be excessive, Jane gently suggested. "Perhaps we could select 3 for such detailed work. The others could feature lace or ribbon embellishments that would be equally elegant." "You're right, of course," Sophia agreed readily. "I don't want to appear gauche. This is all so exciting. My friends at school will be green with envy when they hear I have my own personal modiste." "Miss Mercer has other clients, Sophia," Lawrence reminded her. "She's consulting for us, not entering our exclusive employment." "But couldn't she?" Sophia turned pleading eyes to her guardian. "It would be ever so convenient, and her designs are divine." Jane interceded smoothly. "I'm honored by your enthusiasm, Lady Sophia, but your uncle is right. I have existing commitments that I must honor. Though you'll prioritize Sophia's wardrobe, I trust?" Lawrence inquired. "I'll compensate you accordingly for expediting our order." "Of course, Your Grace." Jane gathered her sketches. "I believe I have everything I need to begin. The walking ensembles and morning dresses can be ready within 2 weeks, with the ball gowns to follow shortly thereafter." As their consultation concluded, Lawrence surprised both women by announcing, "I'll escort Miss Mercer out myself, Sophia. Perhaps you'd like to write to your friends at school while I'm gone." In the grand hallway, away from Sophia's exuberant presence, Lawrence's demeanor softened slightly. "Thank you for your patience with her. She's high-spirited but good-natured." "She's delightful," Jane said sincerely. "You must be very proud of her." "She's my late brother's child," he explained, surprising Jane with this personal revelation. "I became her guardian when she was 12. She deserves a successful season and a good match." Jane studied his face, noting the genuine concern beneath his reserve. "She'll do splendidly, Your Grace. Lady Sophia has natural charm and intelligence, qualities that outshine even the finest gown. You see people clearly, Miss Mercer." His gaze held hers. "A rare gift." "Not always," she admitted. "But I try to look beyond surfaces." "Is that how you've managed to be in my company without apparent trepidation? Most of London society seems to think I might transform into a monster at any moment." The directness of his question startled Jane into honesty. "I judge people by their actions, Your Grace. You have been courteous to me and show genuine concern for your ward. That speaks more to your character than society gossip." Something shifted in his expression, a barely perceptible softening around the eyes. "Refreshingly sensible. London would be improved if more shared your approach." At the door, he surprised her again. "My carriage will return you to your workshop. London streets are no place for a lady alone at this hour." "That's most kind, but I often walk. Indulge me in this, Miss Mercer." His tone brooked no argument. "I would not rest easy knowing you were unprotected after providing us such valuable assistance." Jane acquiesced, secretly relieved to avoid the long walk after an already full day. As the Duke's luxurious carriage carried her through London streets, she wondered at the contradiction between the man's fearsome reputation and the consideration he had shown her. Perhaps there was more to the Duke of Thornfield than society knew, or that he allowed them to see. The following weeks brought Jane into increasingly frequent contact with the Xavier household. Lady Sophia's enthusiasm for her new wardrobe required multiple fittings, and Jane found herself visiting Thornfield House often enough that the servants began to greet her by name. What she hadn't expected was how regularly the Duke himself would appear during these appointments. He never intruded on the fittings themselves, respecting propriety, but he often arrived just as they concluded, ostensibly to inquire about progress or discuss payment. "The blue walking ensemble is especially becoming," he observed one afternoon as Sophia twirled in her newest creation. "You've exceeded our expectations, Miss Mercer." "Jane has the most wonderful ideas, Uncle Lawrence," Sophia gushed. "She suggests I wear this for our outing to the botanical gardens next week. Don't you think it perfect?" "Most appropriate," he agreed, though his eyes lingered on Jane rather than the gown. Later, as Jane prepared to leave, Lawrence detained her with an unexpected request. "Might I show you something before you go? I would value your opinion on a matter unrelated to Sophia's wardrobe." Curiosity piqued, Jane followed him to a rarely used wing of the house. He opened double doors to reveal a grand ballroom, dusty from disuse but still magnificent, with gilded mirrors and a painted ceiling depicting the 9 Muses. "This room has been closed since before my brother's death," Lawrence explained, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Sophia has requested that we host a ball for her introduction to society. It would need significant restoration." Jane moved further into the room, her practiced eye assessing the space. "The framework is exquisite. New draperies, proper cleaning, perhaps updated candelabras, it could be magnificent again. You think it worth the effort?" She turned to face him, surprised by the uncertainty in his tone. "For Lady Sophia?" "Unquestionably. Her first ball should be memorable." Lawrence moved to the center of the room, his footsteps stirring small clouds of dust. "I haven't hosted a ball in 8 years, he admitted quietly. Haven't danced in longer still." Jane understood suddenly that his question went deeper than mere renovation concerns. Change can be difficult, even positive change. "Indeed." He gestured around the empty ballroom. "This room holds memories I've preferred to keep locked away. But perhaps it's time to allow new memories to be created." The vulnerability in his admission touched Jane deeply. "Lady Sophia deserves nothing less than your best effort, Your Grace. As do you yourself." His eyes met hers with unexpected warmth. "You have a gift for cutting to the heart of matters, Miss Mercer." "An occupational hazard," she replied with a small smile. "Fitting gowns requires seeing what others might miss." "And what do you see when you look at me?" The question hung between them, more intimate than any he had asked before. Jane hesitated, knowing her answer mattered more than it should. "I see a man who carries heavy burdens with dignity," she said finally. "One who cares deeply beneath a guarded exterior." Lawrence stepped closer, close enough that Jane could see flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "Most see only the guard, not what it protects." "Perhaps because you've wanted it that way," she suggested gently. A silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Lawrence stepped back, resuming his more formal demeanor. "I'll arrange for the ballroom's restoration immediately. Sophia will be pleased." As they walked back to the main part of the house, Jane wondered what had just transpired between them, and why her heart was beating so rapidly in its aftermath. 2 nights later, Jane was working late in her workshop when a sharp knock at the door startled her. Cautious about visitors at such an hour, she approached the door with scissors in hand. "Who's there?" she called. "Lawrence Xavier," came the response. "I apologize for the late hour, Miss Mercer." Astonished, Jane unbolted the door to find the Duke standing on her threshold, his expression grave. "Your Grace! Is something wrong? Is Lady Sophia unwell?" "May I come in?" he asked instead of answering. "What I have to discuss is better said privately." Bewildered, Jane stood aside to admit him. Her workshop, while neat and professional, was hardly suited for receiving a duke, especially one whose presence seemed to fill the modest space entirely. Lawrence surveyed the room quickly, the cutting table covered with patterns, the dressmaker's forms draped with half-completed gowns, the small desk overflowing with correspondence, before his eyes returned to Jane. "I've received concerning news," he said without preamble. "Lady Harrington's daughter has apparently been sharing certain observations about your increasingly frequent visits to Thornfield House." Jane paled. "I don't understand." Society has taken note of our association and, predictably, chosen the most scandalous interpretation. His jaw tightened. There are whispers that you've become my companion rather than Sophia's modiste. That's absurd. Jane gasped, heat flooding her cheeks. I've done nothing improper. Of course you haven't, Lawrence said firmly. The fault is mine for not anticipating the viciousness of London gossip. I've been too focused on Sophia's preparations to consider how our arrangement might appear. Jane sank into her desk chair, suddenly understanding the potential damage to her reputation and her business. If such rumors spread, I could lose clients. Most ladies won't patronize a seamstress thought to be. She couldn't finish the sentence. Precisely my concern. Lawrence paced the small space, his frustration evident. I came immediately upon hearing the gossip from Lady Ashbury at this evening's dinner. What can be done? Jane asked, practical despite her distress. Lawrence stopped pacing, his expression resolute. Several things. First, all future fittings for Sophia will take place with her companion present. Second, I'll ensure my presence is strictly limited during your visits. Third, he hesitated, I have a proposition that may seem unusual, but could effectively silence the worst of the speculation. Jane looked up warily. What proposition? I would like to officially commission you as the designer of the Thornfield household's new livery and textiles, he stated. This would provide a formal, professional reason for your presence that even the most suspicious minds would accept. Relief flooded through Jane. That's quite clever, actually. Additionally, it would allow me to compensate you for the damage these rumors may have already caused. He named a sum that made Jane's eyes widen. That's far too generous for what would likely be a straightforward commission, she protested. It's commensurate with your skill and the inconvenience this situation has caused. His tone softened. I won't allow your reputation to suffer because of your association with my household, Miss Mercer. Jane was touched by his concern. Few men of his station would trouble themselves over a working woman's reputation. Thank you, Your Grace. I accept your proposition. Lawrence nodded, seeming relieved. Excellent. I'll have the formal commission drawn up tomorrow. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. There is one matter we haven't addressed. Yes? His eyes held hers steadily. The possibility that these rumors have some foundation in truth, not in impropriety, but in genuine regard. Jane's heart stuttered. I'm not sure I understand your meaning. I think you do, he said quietly. I find your company increasingly essential to my peace of mind, Miss Mercer. That fact has not escaped my notice, nor, I suspect, yours. The admission hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. Such feelings, were they to exist, Jane finally said, choosing her words with care, would be impractical at best, impossible at worst. Because of our differing stations? That, and your ward's upcoming season. Lady Sophia needs your full attention and support, not the distraction of scandal. Lawrence studied her face. Your concern for Sophia's welfare speaks well of you. Perhaps we should revisit this conversation after her debut. Perhaps, Jane agreed, though she couldn't imagine circumstances under which a duke and a seamstress might overcome the chasm between their worlds. As he departed into the night, Jane was left with the unsettling realization that her heart had become entangled with a man who belonged to a world she could never truly enter, and the equally troubling suspicion that he might be experiencing the same impossible longing. The preparations for Lady Sophia's ball proceeded at a frantic pace over the next weeks. Jane found herself overseeing not only the completion of Sophia's gowns but also offering input on the ballroom's restoration. True to their agreement, Lawrence maintained a careful distance during her visits, though his eyes often sought hers across rooms with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. The formal commission for the household textiles proved to be genuine work rather than merely a convenient excuse. Jane found herself designing everything from new draperies for the public rooms to elegant table linens for the upcoming entertainments. You've transformed this house, Lawrence commented one afternoon as they reviewed her designs in the library, the ever-present companion dozing discreetly in a corner chair. It hasn't felt so alive in years. Lady Sophia brings the life, Jane corrected gently. I've merely helped create a setting worthy of her spirit. You're too modest. His voice lowered. You've awakened something long dormant here, not just in these rooms. The implication hung between them, too meaningful to acknowledge openly. Jane changed the subject. Lady Sophia mentioned you've agreed to open the ball with her. She's delighted. A shadow crossed his face. Yes, though I confess I approached the prospect with some trepidation. It's been many years since I've danced. Surely it's like riding, one doesn't forget the steps. The mechanics, perhaps. The spirit is another matter entirely. He glanced toward the sleeping companion before adding quietly, I stopped attending balls after Charlotte died. When I resumed, I never joined the dancing. It was the first time he had mentioned his late wife by name to Jane. May I ask why? Lawrence's expression closed slightly. Dancing suggests joy, Miss Mercer. I found that commodity in short supply after my wife's death. And now, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met hers. Now I find myself remembering what joy felt like. An unexpected development. Before Jane could respond, the companion stirred, and Lawrence smoothly returned to discussing the library draperies as if they hadn't ventured into far more personal territory. Later that week, as Jane fitted Sophia for her debut gown, a creation of pale blue silk with silver embroidery that made the girl look like an ethereal vision, the young lady's excited chatter turned unexpectedly serious. Jane, might I ask you something rather personal? Of course, Lady Sophia, Jane replied, pins held carefully between her lips as she adjusted the hemline. Do you think my uncle seems different lately? Jane looked up in surprise. Different how? Sophia shrugged slightly. Less severe. Sometimes I catch him almost smiling when he doesn't think I'm watching. And yesterday, I heard him humming. Uncle Lawrence, humming. Perhaps he's simply pleased with the success of your preparations, Jane suggested cautiously. Perhaps. Sophia looked skeptical. Or perhaps it's because of you. Jane nearly pricked herself with a pin. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm young, not blind, Sophia said with surprising perception. He watches you when you're here. And he mentions your name in the most ordinary conversations, Miss Mercer suggested at this order. Miss Mercer believes that. Lady Sophia, your uncle and I have a professional relationship, Jane said firmly. Nothing more. The girl's expression turned wistful. That's a pity. You make him less haunted. I've always wanted him to find happiness again. Your uncle is devoted to ensuring your successful debut, Jane redirected gently. That should be our focus now. I suppose, Sophia sighed dramatically. But after my debut. Lady Sophia, Jane interrupted, some dreams remain just that, dreams. No matter how much we might wish otherwise. The girl studied Jane's face intently. You care for him too, don't you? Jane busied herself with the hem, avoiding Sophia's too perceptive gaze. Please hold still, my lady. This final fitting is critical for perfecting your gown. But Sophia's observation lingered in Jane's mind long after the fitting ended. She did care for Lawrence, far more than prudence allowed. And if Sophia had noticed, others might as well, despite their careful precautions. With the ball just 1 week away, Jane resolved to maintain an even greater distance. Lady Sophia's debut must proceed without a hint of scandal, even if that meant guarding her heart more carefully than ever. The night of Lady Sophia's ball arrived with all the anticipation of a royal coronation. Jane had delivered the final gowns days earlier and had not expected to attend the event itself. So when a Thornfield footman appeared at her workshop with a small package and note, she was surprised. The elegantly penned message read simply, *Miss Mercer ***, your extraordinary efforts have made this evening possible. It seems only right that you should witness the fruits of your labor. The enclosed is not payment, but rather a token of sincere appreciation. Your presence would honor us greatly. L. X. Inside the package, Jane found an exquisite silver filigree mask and a ticket to the ball, which had been transformed into a masquerade at Sophia's enthusiastic request. Jane's heart raced. A masquerade would allow her to attend without immediate recognition, to witness Lady Sophia's triumph without causing gossip. But was it wise? The line between professional obligation and personal desire had already blurred dangerously. After hours of indecision, Jane finally surrendered to the longing to see Sophia's debut, and, if she were honest with herself, to see Lawrence in the setting they had worked so hard to create. She dressed in her finest gown, a deep burgundy silk she had made for herself the previous year, and arranged her hair in an elegant but simple style before securing the silver mask. Thornfield House blazed with light as Jane approached, her hired hackney joining the queue of far grander carriages. The restored ballroom took her breath away. Magnificent crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across newly polished floors, while garlands of spring flowers adorned the once dusty cornices. A small orchestra played from the gallery as masked guests swirled across the floor. Jane slipped in quietly, grateful for the anonymity her mask provided. From a shadowed alcove, she watched Lady Sophia, resplendent in the blue silk creation, accepting compliments with gracious charm. The girl was a natural, her animation and sweet nature evident even from a distance. Then the music paused, and a murmur rippled through the crowd as Lawrence entered the ballroom. Jane's breath caught. He wore formal evening attire with a simple black mask that accentuated the striking blue of his eyes. He moved with unconscious authority through the parting crowd toward his ward. As tradition dictated, the host and his family would open the ball. Lawrence bowed to Sophia, who curtsied in return, her face alight with happiness as her guardian led her to the center of the floor. The orchestra began a waltz, and Jane watched as the Duke of Thornfield, who had not danced in 8 years, guided his niece with perfect grace through the opening measures. The assembled guests broke into spontaneous applause when the dance concluded. Lawrence escorted Sophia back to a group of young ladies before disappearing into the crowd. Jane lost sight of him as more couples took to the floor. She remained in her quiet observation post, content to witness the success of their combined efforts from afar. When a servant offered champagne, she accepted a glass, allowing herself to enjoy this brief glimpse into a world she had helped create but could never truly inhabit. "You came." The deep voice beside her sent a shock of recognition through Jane. She turned to find Lawrence standing closer than propriety strictly allowed, his eyes intense behind his mask. "Your invitation was most persuasive," she replied softly. "Lady Sophia looks radiant." "She does," he agreed. "Thanks largely to you." He studied her for a moment. "That color suits you remarkably well." Jane flushed beneath her mask. "Thank you. You and Lady Sophia opened the ball beautifully. It wasn't as difficult as I'd anticipated." His voice lowered. "Though I find myself wishing for a partner of my choosing for the next dance." Jane's pulse quickened. "Your Grace, Lawrence," he corrected quietly. "Tonight, with masks between us and convention, might we allow ourselves that small liberty?" The intimacy of his request was both thrilling and alarming. "That would be unwise. Wisdom has little to do with what transpires between us, Jane." The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. "Will you dance with me?" "One dance, before you disappear back into your world and I into mine." Everything practical within Jane urged refusal, but her heart betrayed her. "One dance," she agreed. "But not here, where we might be observed too closely." Lawrence nodded understanding. He offered his hand, which she accepted with trembling fingers, and led her not to the center of the ballroom but through a discreet side door into a smaller music room adjacent to the main space. The orchestra's music filtered through clearly, but the room stood empty, temporarily abandoned by guests focused on the main festivities. "Will this satisfy propriety's demands?" he asked, his tone gently mocking. "Nothing about this satisfies propriety," Jane answered honestly. "But I find I care less than I should." Lawrence drew her into the proper position for a waltz, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. As they began to move to the distant music, Jane felt the careful walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. "I've thought of this," he confessed as they turned gracefully across the empty room. "Dancing with you. Among many other improper thoughts." "We shouldn't speak of such things," Jane protested weakly. "Yet here we are, masks allowing truths normally left unspoken." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I've never met anyone like you, Jane Mercer. You see through pretense, you create beauty from nothing, and you somehow made me remember what it means to feel." Jane's heart thundered in her chest. "Lawrence, please, we come from different worlds. Worlds that have already collided," he pointed out. "Do you feel nothing for me? If so, say it plainly, and I'll trouble you no further." The music swelled around them as they continued to dance, their bodies moving in perfect harmony while their words navigated dangerous territory. "What I feel doesn't matter," Jane finally said. "Society would never accept." "I'm not asking what society would accept. I'm asking what you feel." He stopped dancing suddenly, though he didn't release her. "Tell me I'm alone in this madness, and I'll escort you back to the ball immediately." Jane looked up into his eyes, finding it impossible to lie with his gaze holding hers so intently. "You're not alone," she whispered. "But that doesn't make it any less impossible." Something fierce and triumphant flashed in his expression. "Nothing is impossible when..." The door to the music room opened abruptly, cutting off his words. They stepped apart instantly, but not quickly enough to prevent Lady Pembroke from witnessing their proximity. "Well," she exclaimed, her eyes narrowing behind her feathered mask. "What have we here?" "The Duke of Thornfield in a private dance with, my goodness, if I'm not mistaken, that's the seamstress." Jane's blood ran cold as the woman's malicious gaze swept over her. "I was just leaving," she said quietly, moving toward the door. "I should think so." Lady Pembroke blocked her path. "Though I dare say the damage is already done. Wait until the Morning Post hears that the Duke has been discovered in a tryst with a tradesperson at his own ward's debut." Lawrence stepped forward, his expression hardening to the cold mask that had earned him his fearsome reputation. "You will repeat nothing of what you imagine you've seen, Lady Pembroke." "Or what, Your Grace?" the woman asked with venomous sweetness. "Will you add me to the list of those who have mysteriously disappeared after crossing you? Like your poor wife, perhaps?" Jane gasped at the cruel insinuation. Lawrence went utterly still, his face white with suppressed fury. "You go too far, madam," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Do I?" Lady Pembroke smiled maliciously. "Society has long memories, Your Grace. Charlotte's death may have been ruled accidental, but many still wonder what drove her to that balcony that night. And now here you are, secluded with another woman who clearly knows her place no better than—" "Enough!" Lawrence's voice cut like a whip. "Leave us, Lady Pembroke. What occurs between Miss Mercer and myself is honourable, which is more than can be said for your speculation." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Honourable? In what world is a duke's dalliance with a seamstress considered honourable?" Before Lawrence could respond, Jane stepped forward, her dignity intact despite her humiliation. "In a world where character matters more than title, Lady Pembroke. But I fear such a world exists only in dreams." She turned to Lawrence, her heart breaking. "I should never have come. Please make my apologies to Lady Sophia." Without waiting for a response, Jane slipped past Lady Pembroke and hurried through the crowded ballroom toward the exit, tears blurring her vision behind her mask. She had been a fool to think, even for a moment, that she could bridge the chasm between their worlds, or that a few dances and meaningful glances could overcome centuries of rigid social hierarchy. Behind her, she heard Lawrence call her name, but she didn't turn back. Some dreams were never meant to be reality, and the sooner she accepted that truth, the better for all concerned. The morning after the ball, Jane opened her workshop to find an elegant carriage waiting outside. Her heart leapt, thinking Lawrence had come, but instead, Lady Sophia emerged, looking uncharacteristically solemn. "Lady Sophia! You should be resting after your triumph last night." Jane ushered her inside quickly, aware that the girl's presence would likely spark fresh gossip. "I couldn't rest," Sophia said, pacing the small space. "Not after what happened. Uncle Lawrence is beside himself." Jane busied herself arranging fabric samples. "I'm sure the ball's success far outweighs any small embarrassment." "Small?" Sophia stopped pacing to stare at her. "Jane, Lady Pembroke has already visited 3 households this morning, spreading her poisonous version of events. By noon, half of London will believe you and Uncle Lawrence were caught in some sordid embrace." Jane's hands trembled. "It was a dance, nothing more." "I know that," Sophia said impatiently. "Uncle Lawrence explained everything. He also told me—" She hesitated, "that he cares for you. Deeply." The simple statement pierced Jane's carefully constructed defenses. "He shouldn't." "Why not?" "Because you're a seamstress and he's a duke." "That's nonsense." "It's reality," Jane corrected gently. "A reality your uncle understands as well as I do, despite momentary lapses in judgment." Sophia's expression turned mutinous. "He's coming to see you himself. He would have come last night, but I persuaded him that appearing at your door after midnight would only make matters worse." "He cannot come here," Jane said with sudden alarm. "The damage to both our reputations is already considerable." "Too late," Sophia glanced out the window. "That's his carriage now." Jane's workshop suddenly felt too small as Lawrence entered without ceremony, his expression a complex mixture of concern and determination. He stopped short at the sight of his niece. "Sophia! What are you doing here?" "Someone had to prepare Jane for your arrival," the girl replied with remarkable composure. "I've explained the situation with Lady Pembroke." Lawrence's jaw tightened. "Return to the carriage, please. I need to speak with Miss Mercer privately." "Promise you won't let foolish convention stand in the way of happiness," Sophia demanded, showing surprising backbone. "Sophia," Lawrence's tone held warning. The girl sighed dramatically. "Very well. But remember, I'm not the only one whose future happiness concerns me." With that parting shot, she swept out of the workshop. In the silence following her departure, Jane found herself unable to meet Lawrence's gaze. "This visit is unwise, Your Grace." "We're well beyond wisdom now," he replied, moving closer. "Jane, I must apologize for last night. Lady Pembroke's intrusion and subsequent behavior was entirely predictable," Jane finished for him. "As will be society's reaction to the gossip she's already spreading." "I don't care what society thinks." "But you should," Jane insisted, finally looking up at him. "For Sophia's sake, if nothing else. She deserves a guardian whose reputation won't taint her prospects." Lawrence ran a hand through his hair in uncharacteristic agitation. "Sophia is remarkably unconcerned. In fact, she seems determined to play matchmaker." Despite everything, Jane felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. "She's young and romantic. She doesn't fully understand the consequences." "And you believe you do?" He stepped closer, close enough that Jane could see the fatigue lining his face. "You think I haven't considered every possible outcome? That I entered into this connection lightly?" "No," Jane admitted. "You're too methodical for that." "Then hear my solution." His voice grew intent. "Leave London with me. Today. We'll go to my estate in Northumberland where Lady Pembroke's gossip holds no power. In time, the scandal will fade." Jane stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Entirely serious." His eyes held hers. "Jane, I've spent 8 years buried in grief and guilt over Charlotte's death. I never expected to feel again, certainly never expected to find someone who could see past the walls I built. Yet here you are, a woman of extraordinary talent and character, who has somehow reached through stone to touch what I thought long dead." The naked emotion in his voice shook Jane to her core. "Lawrence, let me finish," he insisted. "I know what I'm asking is unconventional. I know the obstacles we face, your independence, my title, society's expectations. But I also know that finding someone who brings light back into a shadowed existence is rare beyond measure. Jane felt tears threatening. Even if we fled to Northumberland, the fundamental differences in our positions would remain. I would always be the seamstress who forgot her place. Unless you weren't a seamstress, but my wife. The word hung in the air between them, impossible and breathtaking. Your wife. Jane whispered. Lawrence reached for her hands, holding them firmly in his. I had planned a more conventional proposal, one that didn't follow a night of scandal and social disaster. But I find I cannot wait for perfect circumstances. He drew a deep breath. Jane Mercer, I love you. Your intelligence, your talent, your unwavering integrity. I want to share my life with you, to see what we might build together. Will you marry me? Jane stood frozen, her practical mind warring with her heart. The ton would ostracize you. Sophia's prospects, Sophia adores you and supports this match wholeheartedly, he interrupted. As for the ton, their power exists only if we grant it. I have wealth, land, and title enough to weather their disapproval. And my work? Jane asked, her voice small. Would the Duchess of Thornfield be permitted to design gowns? A smile touched Lawrence's lips. I would never ask you to abandon your art. Though I imagine your clientele might shift somewhat. Jane looked around her small workshop, the haven of independence she had built through years of labor. I would need to maintain some purpose beyond being your wife. I would expect nothing less, he assured her. You've never been one to sit idle with embroidery. Hope began to blossom where moments before there had been only resignation. People will talk. Let them, Lawrence said firmly. We've both lived too long concerned with others' opinions. I'm tired of denying happiness out of fear of judgment. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. Jane Mercer, I ask again, will you marry me? Not as a duchess, not as a seamstress, but as the woman who taught me to dance again when I thought I never would. Looking down at this proud, complex man kneeling before her, a man society feared but whom she had come to know as thoughtful, honorable, and unexpectedly vulnerable, Jane made her choice. Yes, she whispered, then stronger, yes, I will marry you. Lawrence rose and pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they finally parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. Lady Pembroke will be most disappointed that her scandal failed to destroy us, he murmured. Jane laughed softly. Perhaps we should send her a special invitation to the wedding. Lawrence's answering smile was transformative, erasing the hard lines that had earned him his fearsome reputation. I knew there was a reason I loved you. As they left the workshop together to share their news with an eagerly waiting Sophia, Jane reflected that some boundaries, even those erected by centuries of social convention, could indeed be overcome by something as simple and profound as love. The gossip columns would have their day, the ton would whisper behind fans and raised glasses, but none of that mattered now. The Duke of Thornfield had finally returned to the dance of life, and found, in the most unexpected of partners, the courage to lead with his heart.